Alrighty, we are in the absolute worst place to do any kind of electronics, my kitchen. It's small, it's cramped, but in this segment we're going to show you how to use either your oven, toaster oven, or a heat gun on how to salvage parts off of PCBs. And a lot of my earlier segments in the show, I always tell you, go get an old phone, go get an old radio and scrap it for parts, but I never really involved myself into explaining how to actually take those parts off. You can use your soldering iron and some desoldering braid and finagle them off the board, but there are easier, slightly more dangerous, and we all love dangerous because people always get hurt, as long as it's not you. So I'm going to re-angle the camera and I'll show you some of the tools and the tips and the techniques on how to actually salvage stuff off of PCBs using a heat gun. Alright, as many of you have seen in Ugster segment, I have a very small kitchen. We don't have a lot of floor space or working space here. So I've actually added this really old cooking tin. So just a cooking pan. It's really cheap, it's decrepit. I use it for soldering on it, and I put it over the sink. God forbid anything's really hot or you need to get something into the sink, I can either dump it on the pan to cool down or throw something in the sink. Now, I've got a lot of plastic bottles here for soaps, and I got a Brita filter, and, you know, some spray-on cooking oil, and rubber gloves for whenever I do my dishes. All of this needs to be removed. If this pan bottle, or any kind of pressurized cooking vessels, like, you know, the spray-on non-stick crap like this stuff, will hit too much heat, it will literally explode. Plus, the heat will reflect off of your countertop and melt anything. And this wicker basket could probably get set on fire. These gloves can cause a lot of noxious fumes, so all of this needs to be cleaned off. Your parents will kill you if you're taking a 1200 degree torch to your freaking counter. So work on the pan if you have to, or if anything, bring anything to your greasy, disgusting looking stove. Alright, so behind me I have the utmost disgusting looking toaster oven in the world. Again, your parents will probably get really pissed off if you set it to 500 degrees and then threw some PCBs in there. Now, the object of this is to heat the actual solder on all of the PCBs up, either using the toaster oven or the heat gun. You can even throw them inside the oven, but that's a little bit too hot. So what I'm going to do is, some of the tools that we have will include, I like locking vice grips. That way I can lock my board down and I can actually pull the entire board away from me while working with it. I've got some regular pliers, as you know, because really you cannot hold these boards in your hand. They're going to be piping hot. I've also got something called hemostats. They're usually found in hospitals, but any precision tools, very small jewelers, needle nose pliers, precision screwdrivers, and things of the such to pull your parts off of. Because a lot of the parts on these plastics will melt very easily, so you got to make sure that you got to get them off the board and into a cooling vessel, or right on top of the tray as soon as possible. So you know, you can even remove the CPU slot from this motherboard with little to no effort, but because it's made out of plastic, it will actually be heat damaged very easily. A lot of these parts on this board, connectors, the BIOS, I'm very interested in the BIOS, the PCI slots, the USB and network connectors up here. A couple of these capacitors would be nice. Plus there's a whole bunch of fun little logic chips on the board that can be pulled off. The fan headers are always fun to play with. The IDE and the floppy drive headers are always fun to have. Capacitors are always good to have. There's a lot of surface mount resistor networks that I need for another project. We've got some frequency crystals, and we've got some pin headers and such. And if you even wanted, you can strip practically this entire board with, you know, a good portion of your weekend. So I'm actually going to go and reset up the angle, and I'm going to get to work on this. Alright, so I've got the motherboard, got my heat gun, got my tools, and I've also got Bunny right behind the camera, because you have to remember, when you cannot put a heat gun that's bursting out over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit on the counter, because you're going to melt anything that's in the area. Never leave a hot running tool on the floor or the counter unattended. What? Oh, yes, thanks, Honey Bun. I'm also wearing, where am I? Hi, I'm also wearing the surgeon's cap, because I have long hair now, and getting your hair in, you know, a hot blast of, you know, jet stream air is not fun. So I've got my channel locks. You do not need to have channel locks. You can take an ordinary everyday household pair of pliers and wrap a whole bunch of rubber bands around it so it actually has that tension to it. And you want to find a spot, and right now I think I'm just going to lock it down to the CPU socket, because I want to try to pull out this BIOS chip and maybe some of the parts around here. The BIOS chip can be used in different projects, such as console flash carts for the Game Boy, or maybe an alternate BIOS for an internet appliance, which hopefully those will be future segments. So go ahead, adjust the nut on the vice grips, and we're going to go ahead and get this working. I've got all my tools within arm's reach. You do not want to reach over the stream of hot air coming out of the heat gun, and remember that when you are actually putting heat applied to this, this is going to actually take that hot air and reflect it. So you don't want to actually point this towards anything where it'll be reflected, say towards the wooden cabinets that I have in my kitchen. So you actually want to angle it down. So enough yapping, I'm going to get to heating up this board and getting to work. Woo! Haha! Critical failure. Nope. You okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Boink. Ah, some of the pins didn't come out. Something just fell off on the bottom side. $10 says it's a capacitor. Oh, capacitor on the bottom side blew. Or, that's our countertop. Don't know what it was. It wasn't fun! Ah, you see this wonderful scorch and explosion mark? This is why we don't use our countertop. Learn from my example, fucktards. Always work on something that is not very valuable. This countertop's ruined, and I'm really glad I rent. Sucks to be my landlord. Alright, so a little bit of time, a little bit of patience, my girlfriend annoying the crap out of me and me ruining my kitchen counter, and a few motherboards later, I've got a nice little parts container full of salvage. Now, like I said, a lot can go wrong. This can be relatively dangerous. Make sure that you have someone by your side that is willing to go and give you first aid, just in case something goes wrong. Take my tips and techniques. I'll put more information in the show notes, as always. But, I was able to salvage a couple of BIOS chips, always really useful. Another BIOS chip. I've got some SRAM that I'm hopefully going to put in my, upgrade the RAM in my NES. I got a whole bunch of little part headers. I got some inductors, some capacitors, a whole bunch of pin headers and whatnot. And thanks to Mustang, I've got this really cool case to put everything in. Now, you can also put your board in a toaster oven or your house oven and do the same thing, but you remember you're working with really, really hot items here, both metal and plastic. Now, the plastics can only tolerate heat for so long, so you got to make sure that you pull them off. I got a couple of PCI headers that I'm going to be using for another project. It took me a couple of attempts, and most of them were ruined, but I did get a few salvageable ones. So, that's about it. This process can also be said for putting boards together. Just in reverse. You put all your boards on top, put all your parts on top of your board, you put it in your toaster oven, or your oven, you let it sit, and all the solder will melt, and, but that's for another segment. So anyway, really, I'll put a lot in the show notes, and I'll put a lot in the, on the forums. If anything, just do some Google searches on how to do surface mount rework or salvaging parts using a heat gun, and really, don't burn down your house, and if you do, record it, because it'll be funny.